Did you ride your Peloton today, Jordan?
No, not yet.
I saw Casey on there.
Peloton or two?
Yeah.
Dude, I've done 2 45-minute classes the last 2 days.
Ooh, nice.
I did a little easy 30-minute low impact ride, but I'll tell you what, the low impact rides really get me sweating. I think almost more than like the traditional rides.
It's because it's consistent, man. There's no like recovery. It's just consistent. That's how I felt.
The freaking Peloton though has been an absolute lifesaver during old quarantine here.
Yeah, it's been nice to have for sure.
Because you were saying your jiu-jitsu gym has been closed for a while.
Yeah, like 5 weeks, man. It's been awful.
Dang, you do jiu-jitsu?
Yeah.
That's like throwing and stuff, right?
Yeah. There's some throwing incorporated with grappling.
Grappling, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Pretty much a huge component of like all the UFC fighters' repertoires.
That's where Rogan kind of got his start in martial arts, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think he started in Taekwondo growing up, but then evolved into jiu-jitsu. Yeah, it's a fun sport.
So how's life in Asheville, North Carolina? I feel like you got to say that with some sort of a drawl. Am I right?
Yeah, we got some good accents down in these parts.
Dude, I just remember vividly the guy we saw walking down the highway that one day, turkey hunting last year. He was like straight off of a moonshine farm.
Yeah.
And Jordan's like, yeah, that's pretty much what the locals look like in old Appalachia.
Yeah, we got some good ones down here.
Are you originally from North Carolina?
Yeah, man, born and raised.
So that's a true accent that you got.
That's right. Guys, welcome to the Hushlife Podcast. We've got a good buddy of ours, Jordan Hotchkiss, is joining us today from the beautiful state of North Carolina, up in the mountains of Asheville. He's a friend of mine that I actually met working back in the day, corporate America, and just so happened we had the same job in different parts of the country, and we met at a trade show, I think it was, and our like senior vice president of the region, who was a hunter himself, walked Jordan over to me and introduced him and said, dude, you got to meet each other. You guys are both really into hunting. It was pretty funny to meet him. I think it turned out like he was somewhat familiar with the Hush brand, and we became buddies pretty much from that point forward. Didn't really ever talk much work, but we talked a whole lot of turkey hunting, whitetail hunting, and elk hunting. So what we're going to do today is dive into Jordan and his buddies got a really cool story. They have taken a lot of the Easterners' dream of going west and going on an archery elk hunt. And that was, I believe, two years ago, they did their very first ever trip out west. So we're going to dive into that and talk about, what was the strategy? How did they figure out their logistics, their planning, and the budget, the tags, like where to even start. One of the most common questions we get is that folks want to come out and try to hunt west, whether that be mule deer or elk, but just how do you get from learning all the stuff online to actually executing the plan? So that'll be kind of the subject of the topic, but I'm impressed. For those of you watching on YouTube, the backdrop that Jordan has is pretty impressive.
You did good.
Not terrible. And so last year this week, we were turkey hunting together. We just killed 2 freaking sweet toms last year. And how you doing so far this year, bud?
Yeah, it's been slow, man. It's been slow. I told you multiple times, I don't think you realized how fortunate we were last year to get it done, because last year was kind of an off year too. I thought this year was going to be better, but it's been weird, man. Not as many turkeys, and the birds just haven't been talking like they have in years past. I don't know what's going on, really.
You're super fortunate because you can basically hunt, so close to your house. Like you're in the zone for pretty darn good turkey area, on a good year anyways. And he was telling me this morning he was considering getting up to go on, but decided to call an audible with some weather or something like that.
Yeah, high winds. They were calling for 16 to 18 mile an hour winds. And then, of course, when the sun breaks, it stops and it's a bluebird day, and they're probably out in the woods gobbling their heads off. But that's how it goes.
Jordan's a super accomplished whitetail hunter, turkey hunter, and just grew up his whole life hunting in the old, is it the Blue Mountain Range?
Blue Ridge Mountains.
Blue Ridge, yeah, yes, the old Blue Ridge Mountains. I was amazed by the topography out there in North Carolina. Case, have you ever been out that way before? Any kind of hunting?
I've never been in North Carolina. No, I can't say I have.
It was.
It looked gorgeous though from the videos.
Yeah, man, it was way more steep than I thought and rugged, where we were kind of exploring in some of those places, and that definitely was a surprise. I didn't anticipate that, never having been there before. You guys,
these mountains are pretty rough.
They are, really.
You know, relatively speaking. Yeah, I mean, they're straight up and down. Once you get out of Asheville and head east, it turns flat pretty quick. But in the Appalachians and Blue Ridge Range, it's straight up and down, and it's rough hunting.
There's been a few songs wrote about the Blue Ridge Mountains, if I recall.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Big bluegrass area.
Oh, yeah.
As well.
So you're a big turkey hunter, big whitetail hunter, probably grew up doing all those things, correct?
Oh, yeah.
What's your favorite thing to do in the woods?
Man, I feel like springtime, my favorite's turkey hunting. And then as soon as turkey season's over, I'm like fixated on, well, whitetail used to be, but after 2018, now it's like up until September's over, I'm fixated on elk. And then as soon as that trip's done, I'm like, okay, back to whitetail mode. But usually whatever season it is, I'm obsessed with it.
So
I agree with that.
Walk us through a little bit, like, obviously most guys that hunt out east, they're fanatical about turkeys and whitetails because that's kind of what you grew up around. It's what's available. It's what's convenient, but a lot of people also are super passionate about that idea of going out west. So when did the plan start with you guys, like, considering this grand venture to come west and try to chase elk?
Well, for me and some of my buddies, I've been dreaming about elk hunting since I was a kid. But, obviously like the rest of us when we were young, YouTube and everything wasn't around. All we had was the outdoor channel, and this going out west to hunt elk was like a pipe dream. There wasn't a very good job of portraying that you could actually feasibly do it, without being on a high dollar ranch. So I was like, maybe I'll get to go one day. It's kind of like one of my dreams. And then, after we started following you guys and the Born and Raised guys, and, people that actually showed us that it was, feasible, and we started, doing some research. We're like, we're doing nothing but getting older, so we might as well, put a plan together and try to kick it in motion, especially with the points game. I mean, I'm already late to that.
Yeah, the points thing is another component of the variable that in some states it makes it even more challenging to kind of consider going out there because, for example, you got to apply in Montana. If you miss that date, then, there's a pretty strong chance you won't get a leftover tag. Wyoming, same situation. New Mexico, same situation. Nevada, Utah are super hard to draw. Arizona's hard to draw. So then you start kind of narrowing down the field. So when you guys were kind of considering that initial starting point of doing your research, what were the things that you were kind of looking into, I guess, just that very first step? I think the first step's probably the hardest.
Yeah, man. I mean, the first step, really was once we set our mind to doing it, me and Tyler and David, that's three of my best friends. First step was just finding out what state we could actually go to. So we started narrowing down what states you could buy over-the-counter tags, because obviously that's what we're going to have to get. And then we just started diving into, logistics, like, how far the drive was, because we knew we were going to drive. We looked into flying for a while, and then we're just like, let's just rent a vehicle and drive across all our gear.
Let's dive into the states real quick. When you're starting that initial thing, obviously, like, what states did you kind of consider? What were on the table out of the gate to think about anyway?
We narrowed it down to Colorado, Idaho, and Montana. Even though, Montana wasn't over the counter per se, it was feasible that we could actually get a tag for there if we wanted to. And then after looking at, it seems like there's not many people around here that elk hunt that we know of. None of our buddies elk hunt, but it seems like any out-of-state person that elk hunts from the east, like, goes to Colorado. So we always hear about higher numbers, and a lot of the videos we see on YouTube, like, Colorado is always packed. So, like, maybe we should focus on Idaho. And then we did utilize Go Hunt a little bit.
Yeah.
Looking at things like, harvest statistics, percentage rate, and just kind of started figuring out that Idaho was a spot we wanted to go, and then just started picking it apart from there.
Did you guys, when you're looking at that state, obviously some of the statistics maybe the bull to cow ratio, harvest percentage of public land available. There's a lot of variables to kind of consider there. How much did budget factor into your decision on like the cost all in of the license and tag?
Yeah, I mean, it did factor in. But Tricky, as you mentioned, Tyler Ross, my buddy, he's the numbers guy. So he had a spreadsheet with all the tags and everything broken down and the costs and all that stuff.
I like his style.
Yeah.
So what did you say his name was? Tricky?
Tyler, he goes by, we call him Tricky.
So
his name's Tyler
Tricky
Ross.
Is our Brian, it sounds like.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. They're one and the same. Yeah. But there wasn't a huge difference in Idaho, Colorado, and Montana. There was a little bit, obviously, Brian explained to me as well before we even looked into Montana, but you had that option of going back for the rifle season, which was pretty sweet to us. But at this point in our lives, we all have young kids. It's kind of hard to do a 30-hour trip to go bow hunt, then come back and then go bow hunt during or rifle hunt during the rifle season. So we, while that's a plus, maybe in the future, right now, it's not very feasible for us to do. And Idaho turned out to be a little cheaper. So it factored in some, but we ended up determining Idaho was going to be the best bang for our buck.
So once you guys came up with Idaho as the place, what was the next step? How did you figure out location? Because this is a question I think we get asked the most. Like, I'm from Idaho. Those guys are Brian and Eric from Utah. But like, if we're anywhere like at a show and somebody comes up and says, "I've been looking into hunting in Idaho. Where should I go?" And I don't ever want to like give out our spots because they're secret, but I've always want to protect those spots that might be somebody else's that I don't want to bombard them. So I always just say, well, you got to do some research. You got to look at all those things we just talked about, statistics of, harvest and bull to cow ratio. Like how did you guys go about figuring out exactly in Idaho where you guys wanted to end up?
Yeah. It seems like even from the outside, I see people all the time on social media like, "Oh, where should I go elk hunting?" It's like, it's a lot of work. It is. You got to do some research. You got to do your part. It's not as easy as just, you don't want to ask somebody, obviously. We use Go Hunt, did look at the bull to cow ratio. We looked at harvest success rate. We looked at, started reaching out to biologists. Mainly Tyler Ross did a lot of this. Started reaching out to biologists, game wardens, foresters, even just say, "Hey, what's the hunting pressure out there look like? Do you see a lot of people? Access?" Another huge thing for us was utilizing OnX, that roadless layer and the burn layer. We started looking at all the burns from previous years, the roadless layer, because, kind of a common theme we were finding was that, and especially after talking to BMAC, it's like, you want to get far back in there, but not like bomb out 10 miles and there's no elk. So you're like, oh, you're killing 2 days coming, back out. So we're trying to find that happy medium of like a unit that we could get off the road, and it was really hard to access. There's a lot of good land in between the road systems, but, we could still come out in half a day or a day and find somewhere else if we weren't on any elk.
I think you bring up some great points on the research component, right? The first thing you said that stood out to me is it's hard and it's a lot. There's a lot to do.
Yeah.
And that is so true. And I think, the way that we're all wired is that having that immediate, gratification of finding answers to questions we might have. And I think the takeaway is the data is out there. It's up to you to figure it out. I think one of the smart things you guys all did is there's 4 of you. And so you guys kind of divided and conquered. Each took different categories of responsibility to help, get to the end all decision of where you're going to go and how we're going to get there. I think that is a really wise decision for those of you listening that maybe are considering going on an elk hunt or out west on a deer hunt. Get a buddy or two or your dad or whoever that might be, and definitely try to divide it up because it is a lot and it's super overwhelming. I think that's a barrier that keeps a lot of folks from even starting the process to figure out how to get there. So I think that was super interesting. I love the, kind of diving into some of the different layers of access and being strategic about it. Again, Go Hunt is a great resource to kind of identify a lot of statistics. OnX is a fantastic resource for when you're out in the field and you're pre-scouting and you're just trying to like get some zones that are worthy. And then to your point, contacting the different agencies, whether that be the game and fish biologists or law enforcement or whatever that is, everybody has some potential data that you could get from it. I think the key is collecting all that data and then starting to evaluate, how do we make decisions or pivot off what we've learned? I think some other ones that we've historically used with success would be, there's a lot of great hunting forums out there. If you listen to how we built our brand, Casey and Eric and I, a lot of us had a lot of history on those. And although they're not as popular anymore, they have archives of data still available. So if you're zeroing in on a unit or a particular tag or something, you can go search those forums. You can dive into the archives and you might be able to pull out something that could be very valuable. And then you start piecing all these together. You got information from the biologist, stuff that you've learned maybe through networking, what you might have seen on an online forum, and maybe something that you read in a magazine. And all of a sudden, all these data points are coming together just to further help your decision. So I thought that was super, super interesting, just how you guys kind of came up with a couple zones. If I recall, you guys had a couple zones picked out. Is that right?
Yeah, we had a couple zones. And to your point, we did join some forums. I think Tyler actually met a few people on the forums. And it's as simple as, you don't even have to go on the forums. If you just like Google search the unit you're looking at, forums are going to pop up from where people have been talking about it. And you can just dive in there. And now I will say there's a lot of, I don't know if people do this on purpose, probably, but there's a lot of, no matter what unit you look into, there's always going to be somebody that's like, the elk numbers are terrible. The wolves are killing everything. There's hunters everywhere. So we kind of had to look past that because, like, no matter where you turn, there's negative stuff about everything you look at.
Yeah, I've experienced that quite a bit. But I just wanted to touch on a point you talked about a little bit earlier. I think this could help some people out when they're doing their research. Is what I've found in the years, and it's and when you were talking about, you reached out to some of the different agencies like Fish Cops or Forest Service, BLM, whoever. I've always found that if you go into that phone call with whoever you're talking to, and it can even be like somebody that comes up to me at our booth, and if I can tell they've done a little bit of research, it's not just as broad, like where in Idaho should I go? But especially when you talk to fish cops, they don't want to just spill their guts to you as well. But if you go into that conversation with a little bit of research and have some open-ended questions like, what are the elk numbers like in this spot? Or I'm really looking into this drainage. It seems like they're a little more willing to kind of tell you what you're trying to get than if you just go into it very broad and say, I want to hunt Idaho, where should I go? If you put your research in that and then you use that in that conversation, it seems like most people are going to be more willing to share some not secrets, but share some areas with you if you show that you've actually done a little bit of research yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. And to your point, when we were calling the game wardens, Tyler specifically, we were narrowing it down to different drainages in different spots and saying, hey, what's the pressure like up this drainage or, this trail or whatever. And then they'd be more apt to give us more information. We definitely weren't just calling and saying, hey, is this unit good to elk hunt? Yeah. We had specific questions dialed in. And they were all pretty good. It was pretty hard to get a hold of them, I think, just because they're out in the field so much. But when we made contacts, they were pretty helpful.
I think even honestly, as much as we get an opportunity to elk hunt out west, if we draw a tag for a unit that we're not familiar with, we get lucky. For example, like last year, my Wyoming elk tag, it's really the same process of trying to just learn a new area, through the east scouting. The advantages that living out here, we could maybe go verify stuff with boots on the ground versus if you're out east, your scouting is going to be pretty well limited to online only. But certainly when you bring specifics up to people, specifically biologists that know the area, they manage the elk herd, I think you're going to be able to receive so much more, legitimate data and feedback in return, because they're like, oh man, these guys have done their homework. They kind of know some areas. And then they may, spin off into even like a different potentially piece of information, that could be helpful for you guys. So at this point, you guys have you've kind of narrowed down, that Idaho's the place you're going to be. You're starting to develop a couple different, options to explore further within e-scouting. You're making some phone calls to biologists. You're doing a little homework on the old forums and trying to just gather as much data. What were the other components of, I guess, maybe like the logistics? I know you referenced the 30-hour, it was like a 30 some hour drive, right, to get out there. So what did you guys decide to do for that component of logistics?
Yeah, I mean, once we decided we were driving, we figured out it'd probably be best to rent a vehicle just to keep from having to put that many miles on one of our vehicles. I mean, we all have trucks, but we decided that getting a Suburban would be the best thing. And Dirty Dave could get a deal through his through his work. Dave Winberg could get a deal through his work for a rental vehicle, so we ended up getting a Suburban. We wanted something four-wheel drive, obviously, and ended up using that.
So did you guys end up bombing straight through to Idaho, or did you stop anywhere, or just kind of rotate driving shifts?
Yeah, man, we just rotated. We hit the road, and the first time we stopped at some I think it was some we went into Idaho and like hit a Walmart right before it closed at like 11:45 that night, and found some BLM land that we could camp on. So we just like pulled over and threw our gear out, threw some tarps out, and like slept in the sage. And I remember it was just like first time like being outside, you know, like the smell of the sage. I'm like, God, what is that smell? Like, realizing it was just overpowering, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we slept there and then got up and, you know, started trying to get to where our first waypoint was. And before we left, even started to drive, we had, I think, like 70 plus waypoints in 4 or 5 areas that we wanted to focus on, and we had them numbered from, you know, best spot to worst spot. Because speaking with you and a lot of the other people we spoke to, one of the common themes was like, don't get hung up on one area, you know, and if there's not elk there, there's not elk there. And we figured that out pretty quick as we started getting into our hunt. But
I think that happens to a lot of guys, is they get so concentrated on one area, and maybe they've even hunted it in the past and they've found elk in that area. But we always say, and a lot of guys say, you find elk where elk are. Yeah. So not just having one area, but having multiple areas that you can just kind of start checking the boxes, like, you know. And sometimes that's what hunting is you're not going out and finding animals, but really you're going into areas and you're finding where the animals are not, so you can move on to the next area and just kind of eliminate those areas where they're not hanging out at that time.
Yeah, being nimble, right, when you're out there is so critical, particularly if you don't know the area and you're kind of coming in blind to a degree. You just, to your point, you know, setting up a base camp and just putting all your chips into one place, if you only have a limited number of days, can sometimes be a bit of a gamble, versus if you're a little bit more nimble, you might be able to validate, this place is either, you know, if there's too many other guys here, we're not seeing any fresh sign, not hearing any bugles, time to move to go check out spot 2. So I think that that's definitely something that is a good takeaway for a lot of folks exploring new areas. What was your thoughts when you kind of first saw like the country you're going to be chasing elk in? Because none of you guys have ever been out to Idaho before, correct?
I played ball out west. I played baseball in Idaho for a little bit when I lived in Billings for a year. But as far as like being in that country, like looking at it from a hunting perspective, I'd never been in that type of country. And I know the biggest thing, and I tell people this, that surprised me was just how big it was. Like, you know, because here we're heavily timbered in the Appalachians. And when we got out there, it's like a lot of, you know, just junipers and small bushes. And it's a lot of like bald mountains. So it's like, oh, we'll go up to that knob and glass. It's like a 15-minute walk. And it's like an hour and 45 minutes up to the top. Damn, this is a long ways. I mean, you know, It was just a lot bigger than I anticipated. What were
the dates you guys decided to go chase elk with the bows?
I think we left on the 7th or the 8th of September, something like that. And the round trip was going to be 14 days.
Okay.
2 days on each end driving. So
pretty well, like
14 days.
Pretty decent time of the year to be in the elk woods, you know, kind of hitting that sweet spot of, let's say, September 9th, 10th, you know, through the 18th, somewhere in there.
Yeah. I mean, the goal was to go during the rut. I mean, because that was, you know, my dream hearing the bull scream. I never heard that in my life. So we wanted to be able to get out there and chase them when they were talking, and, you know, try to get after them.
Once you got there, you got kind of set up to spot number 1. Was the tactic trying to do any kind of calling? Were you guys doing like a backpack style hunt, base camp? What was like the initial, like first type of approach to that area you got to?
Yeah. So, I mean, we were prepared for, all of them. We had stuff that we could bivvy. We had stuff that we could, hike in and base camp or camp right beside the truck or the Suburban. The first spot, we did end up just pitching camp right beside the Suburban. And the first night we got in there in mid-afternoon, we went up to this high spot in Glass. We all broke up, went to different spots to Glass and just glassed a bunch of drainages, and didn't find any elk. But, man, the elk sign was there. And that was another big thing that we had to figure out and learn was what fresh sign looked like, because this might be silly, but, the humidity out there is so dry that it was hard for us to determine, how fresh scat was or tracks or, even rubs, because here it's so humid that, week-old poop can look, looks like it's a day old. But so the elk had definitely been there. Initially, when we got up on that particular ridge, there was elk sign everywhere. Knowing what I know now, it was probably a few weeks, maybe a month old. The bulls had been tearing up the pine trees or junipers or whatever it was. So they had been there, and that was positive. We were excited about it. But that first night, nobody saw an elk. But we found some sign, and, we were excited.
So at what point, how many days did it kind of take you to actually see, hear, kind of have that first elky experience?
So the next morning, so let me back up a little bit. Our other buddy, Tyler Nix, had caught the freaking stomach bug on the way out here. No. So yeah, his son had got it right before we left. And so he was laid up in a tent. He hiked up that first night in Glass, but I think that was like the nail in the coffin. So the next morning he was in the tent. And our plan was to actually go up this old road, this old logging road, and just call. And then if we didn't see anything or hear anything, because we hadn't seen elk, we were already going to be done with spot number one. Tyler staying in the tent, and me, David, and Tricky decided to go up this logging road. We're like, okay, so we're just bebopping along. And I'm like, I'm going to stop in and rip a bugle, see what happens. So that's another thing I will tell anybody that's listening to this is thinking about going, is learn how to call. And I want to make a bold statement here. I'm not, we're not out there like lit balling and doing all this crazy calls that some of you guys can do. But if you can run a turkey diaphragm, you can learn how to mew and bugle on an elk call. Like, it wasn't that hard to pick up. So I will say definitely we practiced a lot, months and months before we left, but I would definitely say try to learn how to sound somewhat like an elk, because that ended up what allowed us to kill the bull. So anyways, the first morning we're hiking up this, and we're just, noobs. Our bows are on our packs, and I'm like, rip a bugle, and we're like, okay, well, didn't hear anything. So we're like walking along 3 minutes later, and we look up on the hill, and we're like, there's legs right there coming down. All of a sudden this freaking giant bull is coming down the hill, and all our bows are on our packs. We're like, get the bows off the packs.
Just a total yard sale happening on the logging road.
Oh, dude, we're throwing stuff everywhere. And he saw us, so he took off, and we tried to like chase him, but he never made a peep, just came in silent. So that was lesson number one, figuring out, like, if we're going to call, we need to have our bows ready.
Can happen fast, man.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I would honestly argue that turkey calling with a diaphragm is way more challenging than learning how to elk call with a diaphragm. There's just so many more, like cutting and stuff. Some of the stuff that you guys are able to do back east where you're growing up turkey hunting and calling a lot, I think is so much more challenging than learning how to call a bugle. And probably what you learned out pretty quick is, as long as you sound moderately like an elk, like that's pretty much good enough for being out in the woods, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, if you can make like hit three different notes calling elk, like you're gonna be probably pretty good. Like turkey calling, you're hitting like all these crazy notes. But I was gonna ask you, because I think it's interesting. I've thought about this a lot, especially over the last 5 years, and the more people I meet from back east. Like, how much of your experience growing up turkey hunting and whitetail hunting were you guys able to use while chasing elk? Because like you were talking about sign, I think whitetail hunters are a lot more in tune to sign than we are here in the West. How much of that how much of that your guys' hunting abilities you had growing up did it resonate into elk hunting?
I think it played a huge part, man. Especially, you know, like you say, the sign thing. I mean, in these mountains, our deer numbers are really low, especially in our big piece of national forest we have here. I think like average deer killed is like 1 per square mile. So our deer numbers are not great. So finding fresh signs kind of hard. And then, you know, as spooky as whitetail are with movement and wind, you know, that played a huge part. And then, you know, I know it seems like a lot of Western hunters pick on turkey hunting, but, you know, in my opinion, man, turkeys have probably the best eyes of any animal I've ever hunted. I mean, they just freaking catch any kind of movement. The tactics we use for turkey hunting, as far as calling, using, you know, terrain to your advantage, the way you're going to set up and seeing the way the land lays, like which way you think they're going to come, coupled with, you know, playing the wind and, you know, playing the eyes of both turkeys and whitetail, I think played a huge part in our success and how we went about hunting them.
I think that's another super key point. Again, just, man, so many folks might, you know, question whether it translates, you know, the whitetail style hunting or maybe even turkey hunting that you've been accustomed to out in the Midwest or the East. Will that translate to elk hunting? I think, to your point, like 100%. And, you know, like Casey mentioned, sometimes I think the whitetail hunters there's another level of strategy involved there that I think sometimes gets overlooked out West that could really help try to figure things out. You know, I think there's a cerebral level to a lot of whitetail hunters that I don't see as much in the West for some reason. And I probably because, you know, like you're saying, the whitetail are just such a spooky, kind of a sketchy animal to be chasing, particularly in some of the areas where there's not a lot of them. And it's super hard to kill one in the Blue Ridge Mountains or whatnot. So that's always super interesting. So when, at what point in the trip did you actually get to hear that first bugle where you're just like, you know, like, wow, that's what we're looking for?
So that's a pretty crazy story too. I'll try to keep it short for time's sake. But so we after that, we decided to pick up and move, even though we saw that bull. It was like, you know, we determined he was just like a lone bull, just covering ground. So we left and went to another spot. And again, we found a little sign, but just wasn't that great. So we ended up just going up north, a little farther north in the unit. And a few of the guys that Tyler Ross had actually met, I think via forums or Facebook or something. We'd been texting with him back and forth, and he had 4 or 5 pictures, screenshots of like the waypoints that we had saved with topo and all that. And he actually sent it to him, was like, hey, we're trying to debate which of these spots we should go to. What do you think? And they were actually like, you know, I would recommend maybe trying this spot. This looks pretty good from what you've sent me. So we took that into effect and started going to one of those spots. And we actually came. So before the first 2 spots, there was no hunting pressure, nobody. And then we went up north, and dude, it was like, we pull into this trailhead. There's like canvas tents and horse trailers. And I'm like, what the crap? Like, it's like outfitters everywhere. And immediately we're like, oh no. But then obviously we're like, and we're seeing locals. So we're like, okay, there's obviously elk here. If there's all these people, like, you know, these guys know, and there's outfitters and stuff. So it actually worked to our advantage, because we backed out and went to the waypoint we wanted to get to. We found another trailhead on the back side of it and pulled up to that gate, and there was nobody there. And just, you know, unloaded and put our stuff on our pack, and then bombed back in a couple miles and kind of set up a base camp there. Hunted a few days, didn't hear or see any elk. Yeah, we didn't hear or see any elk for the first 2 days. David had to go out and call. It was his daughter's birthday. So he went back to find service and like drove back into this little town so he could FaceTime his daughter. And me, I went one way, and Tyler, the 2 Tylers, Tyler was recovered from his stomach bug, had went to another way. So I'm like hiking along. And I'll tell you one thing that surprised me was this whole time again, it goes back to these mountains being so big. I just thought that, like, even without glass, you'd be able to see an elk on the hill, because you like think that they're going to stand out. But the first time I saw elk through my binos, it was like, you know, they looked like they were like this big. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I realized that tree's 80 foot tall versus 25 feet tall, and the elk is not going to just stand out on the side of the mountain, you know? So I'm hiking up this trail. I find a group of elk. It's like midday. That's another thing. All of our encounters, besides that one, all of our opportunities were in the middle of the day. Like I killed my bull at like 2 p.m. Anyway, so I'm like, oh crap, there's freaking elk. I'm all pumped up. The wind was blowing to them. So my plan was to come back down and go over the top of this ridge. And also I'll say we were there to kill an elk. Like we didn't care if it was a cow, we had realistic expectations. We were just like trying to get meat on the ground, get some elk on the ground. So I'm like, I'm going to drop over this, top of this ridge, circle back, and I'm going to pop over top of them while they're bedded and just kill one of these freaking cows. Well, of course, that hike took me like 2 hours and 45 minutes. And I pop over the ridge, and they were kind of like bedded under this tall grassy knob, and on both sides was just heavy timber. I'm like trying to get up to the top of this grassy knob, and I look, and they had gotten out of their bed, and I see them like in a line, skyline on top, and all of a sudden I see some bulls with them, and I'm like, oh my God, they got up. So I basically start sprinting around the bottom of this knoll to try to cut them off while they're coming this way. Well, right before I saw them, man, I got into the north facing side of that timber, and it was like I stepped into a barn. I mean, like I could smell elk. Yeah. It smelled like livestock. I mean, there was fresh poop everywhere, just wet where they'd been there that morning. And I'm like, oh my God, this is what it looks like to see fresh sign finally. And so I'm like sprinting around, and I don't hear anything. And I'm like, oh man, they must have ducked me. Well, all of a sudden I hear a bull scream, like above me, like, I don't know, 500 yards. And then as soon as that one screamed, because I thought it was that group of elk, I heard just a low, just a mean sounding bugle. And it was like 70 yards behind me. And I'm like, oh, and I turn around and here comes this freaking like 300-inch bull with his nose and the hind end of a cow at like 75 yards, like, so that was the first freaking thing I'd like experienced with a bull. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm like trying to range as fast as I can. And he's like right behind this cow, and they're beelining to the trees. And I'm like trying to go down this shale rock and just trying to make a move. And then I was moving so much, which I knew it was like one of those do or die situations. The cows, when I get down to try to get a shot, I look up and all the cows are staring at me because I just made so much noise. But I didn't care. I was like, I knew I was going to have to get aggressive or I wasn't going to get a shot. So I like ranged him and drew back, and then I look up and the cows are staring at me and they all take off. And I ranged them at like 60. And I guess that's another thing that I'll mention. Like we've been shooting at like 80, 90 yards for months, because prepping as far as that's concerned. And so he's in the woods. So I'm like, oh crap. Well, I look and there's like a raghorn at like 40, but I had still ranged him at 60. So I actually pulled down and squeezed one off and overshot him by like a foot. And I was so disappointed. And I will say I started laughing because when I'm like, before this, watching people miss elk, I'm like, how are you missing after killing a whitetail? I'm like, how are you missing these animals the size of a horse? So I got served a slice of humble pie really quick. But I was just so excited, even though I had missed. And it probably made me feel better because I didn't shoot at the giant bull. I was shooting at the raghorn that was standing there. And I'm like, I was pissed that I missed him, but I was so excited that I just had that experience. I sat down and was just like shaking, and I was so pumped up, man.
Yeah. So like in retrospect, thinking back on that first encounter where you really like were in the zone of elk, what were some of the like two takeaways, kind of thinking back, reflecting on that moment when, hearing your first bugle, seeing like your first elk within bow range, two takeaways that you would say like really resonate with you today?
I mean, I think about that bull all the time. I'm so happy I killed the one I did, but like, I'm just like, oh my God, that'd have been so epic if I killed that thing. One of the biggest things initially was I don't want to say like being even more in shape, because we had been like hiking and training for like probably 8-9 months. Cause we knew, just everything we'd seen in the terrain, we knew it was going to be intense, but I'll say even more so because, my nerves and me running around the base of that knob with a pack on my back and everything, like I was, a little gassed. So that, and then also, even though we have steep country around here, we didn't practice as much shots, like, like straight over, angles. Almost like, yeah. I mean, almost like tree stand angles. I never really took that into effect. So that was another big thing that initially I was like, okay, I need to be in, even better shape, because I think, me being gassed affected my decision-making right there and my shot. And then also just the angles of those shots, because it was just straight up and down.
I think those are two really solid points for all hunters, frankly. Like, while being in shape doesn't necessarily mean you're going to shoot any more animals, I think to your point, in those situations where you need it, definitely helps. And then the angle thing is one to me that really resonates for anybody hunting, particularly out west. Doesn't matter what it is, what animal you're chasing. Constantly in those situations, we try to practice at the 3D archery shoots if you have any. I think that's probably been the most realistic practice that we've come across, that you can get 25 type shots in that are in various situations, typically off camber, up or downhill, because those
That's
are very realistic.
I would say
right?
your up and down is huge, obviously, in any hunting, but I've heard a lot of guys talk about it coming out west for the first time, is if you don't have a bubble, if you're rifle hunting or archery hunting, if you don't have a bubble on your sight, it can be very misleading, because a lot of times you're not standing on a flat piece of ground, right? You set up wherever you can set up when that bull comes in. And a lot of times, you're standing on a hill that's falling away from you, and you get that bow pulled up. And I've done this a lot, where pull the bow back and you feel like your bow's not cantered, it's straight up and down. And then you look at your bubble and it's just, your bow's like this. It's very different than going from hunting some flatter stuff to hunting elk, where you find elk up in the mountains typically,
Oh yeah. And that was another thing. I stress that to a lot of my friends as well, that bubble. And we learned that pretty quick by, because, most of the time our max shots at whitetail is so thick around here, 40, 45 yards if you're lucky. And if your bubble's way off, it's not going to hurt you that bad. But when we were practicing, those 80, 90, 100-yard shots, like if your bow's canted a little bit, you're shooting 1.5 feet to the right. It makes a huge difference.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Well, you obviously got the taste of what that situation is going to eventually be like. The heart rate's increased. A lot going on there with a bunch of eyeballs looking at you, elk bugling. From that point forward, if I recall, you guys were kind of in them.
Yeah, so I ended up killing that bull right there, I think 2 or 3 days later. But yeah, once we found those elk, and at the same time, Tyler got into a herd of like 50 on the other side of this other ridge. So we were in elk at the same time. It wasn't the same elk either. So they were all tore up as well. But yeah, so the next 2 days, we basically spent chasing this herd of elk. We got into some good back and forth, calls with them, some bugles, back and forth with some bulls. But it seemed like, I think one thing that stood out was just how fast those animals are. Like even if they're just on the move, just walking, it's like, if you're not going to intercept them and you're behind them, unless, that bull's ready to fight, it's good luck. You're not going to catch them. They move so fast. Like you can be in the game and then all of a sudden they're just like, they're gone.
Yeah, it's hard to catch up to some elk that are moving, even if they're feeding. It's like, you watch them on the hillside and you're like, okay, they're not going anywhere. They're just feeding along. And an hour later, you're still chasing.
So let's fast forward to the moment of truth when you guys are finally in them on the day that you had the success. Walk us through that story. I think it's pretty cool how it all worked out.
Was one of the last mornings. We all met up and we're like, okay, let's split up 2 and 2. And David, Dirty D, was actually like, why don't you guys maybe go on the back side of that ridge where they'd been bedding and maybe set up and try to glass that knob. And they had found a pretty good walla on closer to camp. So him and Tyler Nix went to the walla, and me and Tyler Ross went up that creek, and we were sitting there. We literally got to where we wanted to start glassing, look up on that knob, and here comes the bull that we ended up killing with like 6 or 7 cows on a grassy side of that knob. I'm like, holy crap, here we are again. We're in them. They were probably 500-600 yards away straight up. So we're on the other side, like right here, glassing up. So we dropped down in the creek again. We'd actually said, we're not coming up this freaking mountain like the day before. But of course, once he bugled, we're like, okay, we're taking off.
A lot of bad decisions are made after you hear that bugle.
Yeah, exactly. But, I started bugling back at him, and man, we were going back and forth. Like he was definitely in it. We crossed the creek and started going up the steep part of the mountain, and we were bugling back and forth, and then it kind of stopped, and we ended up we busted some elk out, and we were like, oh no, was it them? It turns out it wasn't. It was another group. So we got up to where we thought we were kind of like at the same elevation because the wind was kind of, you know, up and down, kept switching back and forth. And we're like, you know, we need to get parallel with this thing so we can, you know, kind of try to play the wind as best we can. Well, at this point, it was like, I don't know, probably 12 o'clock. And we got to the point where we were just on the side of dropping over and being into that heavy timber where they had been bedding. So we're sitting there, we had a little bit to eat, and we're like, let's just try to wait for this wind to, you know, stay constant, and we'll drop over there. If they're over there bedded, then we'll try, and they're either there bedded or they're not, obviously. So the wind finally got consistent. We get to the top of this knob, and I'm like, Tricky, I'm like, if he's in here, he's going to answer this call just because he'd been so vocal. Sure enough, we topped that freaking little ridge, and I mute, and he's just, he was bedded, just like a bedded bugle. And we were like, oh, my God, it's like 90 yards, like in the timber. Holy crap. So we just start working him back and forth, back and forth. Man, we were probably there for 30 minutes, him bugling at every freaking cow call. So finally, we're like, we were so close, we couldn't see him, obviously, because it was so thick, but it was like, you know, we're going to have to do something. And it was coming down the wire, so we're like, screw it, let's just get aggressive with him. Watching you guys and born and raised, like whatever. So I just blow a freaking bugle right in his face, and then he, like, we hear him stand up out of his bed and start just raking these trees, and he answers back, and I'm like, oh man, I'm like, he's getting mad. So so we start like just leapfrogging from tree to tree, trying to get into the bedroom where they're at. And I'm not so sure if the cows like tried to take him away because they didn't want to be harassed, or if he was trying to take the cows away. I don't know, but they started getting away from us. And it came to a point where I was behind this big, like, fallen down tree, and Tricky dropped back like 60, 70 yards and started calling. And I had my glass out, and I could see the cows and the bull probably like 90 yards down in this dark timber. I could see his rack, and I'm just like, you know, oh my God, my freaking blood's pumping. So Tyler just starts mewing and like breaking branches, and just like, you know, after watching you guys like taking logs and slamming trees and everything else. So Tyler starts doing that. That went on for like probably 30 minutes. Well, this large calf comes, we kept piquing her curiosity. She keeps coming up to like 20 yards from me. And funny story, well, it was coming down to the wire, and I hear a noise, and I turn around, and Tyler's like putting his release on his bow. And I'm like, no, dude, like,
don't shoot short stand you.
I'm like, do not freaking shoot this calf. Like, I'm like, do not do it. So he doesn't, but I think she actually saved us. Like, she came back 2 or 3 times, and he just keeps calling, man. And finally I see, and I've been ranging all these open spots the whole encounter. I see him like commit to this trail, and I'm like, holy crap. So I range a spot, and it was like 46, and I draw back, and he stops like facing me. And Tyler was behind me, and I like put it, you know, because at that point we'd been on him long enough for me to just like chill out and just like completely hone in on this shot. I'm like, I'm about to shoot him frontal at 45. I mean, I felt dead freaking calm. And so I shoot a 5-pin slider. I put my pin on him, and he's like walking towards Tyler, and he keeps walking. So I'm like 40, 30, 20. And 10 yards, he stops at 10 yards, and I just put it, he was quartering to me. I put it right behind his shoulder blade, just squeezed it off, and it buried Fletch deep. And he like takes off running, and I see the blood, and I like drop my bow, and I look at Tyler, and he's like literally on the verge of weeping, and like runs up to me and gives me a hug. And like, no joke, like I give him a hug, and I look up, and the bull is like tipping over at 30 yards.
Wow.
And just
pretty all
falls. Dude, it's like the best, you know, besides, you know, marrying my wife and my kids. That was like probably the best moment of my life. I mean, it's like having all that come together, and it was like a dream, because, you know, it was getting down to the wire. I'm like, I don't know if this is going to happen. You know, it was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've mentioned it already before, but that is just such a huge accomplishment for anybody, frankly. But for you guys to go 30 some hours cross country to a place you've never been to figure it all out, put it together, and actually walk away as a successful hunt with a punched elk tag is just absolutely incredible. I freaking love that story so much.
Yeah, man. And I'll say this too, like, elk hunting is such a team effort. And like, I've heard you guys say it so many times, and you don't realize it until you're in the moment, but like every single one of us played such a huge part. Like that was our elk. Like
Yeah.
I was just the trigger guy. Like, you know, I mean, between Tyler Nick's glass, and he was a freaking glass and all-star finding elk. David told us like, hey, why don't you guys go try that? You know, Tricky calling behind me. Like it was such a team effort. And then, you know, obviously cutting it up and hiking it out of there. And, you know, that's the ultimate team effort. But
Yeah. So I'm always curious, first time walking up on that elk, as he lays, you know, before you start cutting into him, what goes through your mind?
it was just like, man, it was incredible. I mean, he was just seeing him there, and just, he was so big. You don't realize how big those animals are until you're like, you walk up to one. It's just like, it's just the best feeling ever.
To this day, like we've killed a lot of elk. It's just every time it's a surprise. Like, man, these are big animals. It doesn't matter how many you kill. Like every time you walk up on one, it's just like, wow. It's a little overwhelming sometimes, and especially for you guys walking up on your very first elk, coming 30 hours from the east to seeing dead elk on the ground. That's a pretty cool story. I was telling Brian I remember when you killed that elk. I think we were hunting together. Brian showed me the picture, and it was just like, man, that's an accomplishment. There's a lot of guys. I tell a lot of people, like, even if you grew up here in the West and you know elk, probably less than 1% of people kill an elk their very first trip, and especially with a bow.
How long did it take you guys to get that bull packed off the mountain?
Well, I think we killed him at like 2, and so we still had to find Tyler, Nix, and Dave because they went to that wallow. So the plan was, which is a stupid plan, like, if we kill something, we'll get out and bugle as loud as we can, and you'll hear us like like Anchorman, like news team assemble or something. But so that didn't work after blowing on a bugle for an hour. So now, you know, I was the only one with an inReach, but now we're going to get more inReaches and get some good radios or some way to communicate. But Tyler actually hiked out and found the guys and was like, you know, come on, let's go. We killed one. So after all was said and done, we cut him up and got him back to camp at like 12:45 in the morning. And when we started the pack out, we're like, we had some mac and cheese we were saving at camp. We're like, oh, dude, we're going to have some tenderloin and mac and cheese. And we got back and hung the meat up in a tree, and we're like, we were dead. Like, just went to sleep immediately.
I think that's, man, if you guys have watched any of our videos or some of the Born and Raised collaborations that we've done, the 11 o'clock to like 3 p.m. time frame has historically produced a lot of elk. And I think that's just another cool takeaway that maybe if you've never hunted elk out west before during the rut, you might assume that mornings and evenings are your only shot. And I mean, your story is spot on. The bull's bedded. You got him riled up. You got him fired up. And eventually he just couldn't resist it, you know, and gave you that opportunity, which was that freaking 10 yards, which is absolutely insane. But the midday, the old swing shift bulls, Case, something else, aren't they?
Well, it's kind of similar with turkeys, right? I've heard and read a lot about turkeys, and the best time, you know, a lot of guys say to kill turkey is between that 10-2 window. And, you know, in theory, they come out of the roost. You correct me if I'm wrong. I'm a very novice turkey hunter. They come out of the roost. They're with their hens. The hens go sit on the nest, and then the toms go and wander, try to find more hens, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, if you can get a turkey to answer you and gobble between 10 and 2, then 95% chance you're going to kill him because they're just by themselves and looking for love.
I think same with elk.
Yeah.
You know, the bulls are with their cows. And I try not to ever miss a morning hunt for elk, because I think that's a great time to kill an elk. Anytime's a great time to kill an elk. But mornings, I like to figure out where they're coming from and where they're going, obviously from their feed to their bed, and try to intercept them. But that 10 or 11 till 3 for elk, when they're in their beds, they're very susceptible to being called in, because if you get in, like you guys did, get into their bedroom and, you know, pose a threat to them, that's when they really get fired up, because it feels to them like you're coming in on their cows.
You were not able to go back last year because you had a new baby born right around that time frame. I know Tyler and Dave did go back, had a good time, but nothing quite worked out. What's your guys' plan this year? Are you gonna try to make this? Has it become an annual trip? That's the $1 million question. Man,
initially we're like, you know, we'll do this every 2 to 3 years. And after the first year, we're like, we've got to figure out a way to do this every year. So yeah, I mean, as of right now, and now we're looking, you know, we're starting to build points in, you know, Wyoming and some other places, to like, you know, hunt more and get more elk experience. And then hopefully by the time we get like a really good unit, we'll know what we're doing a little bit more. But yeah, I think last year they left earlier in the season. They were going to try to be back by David's daughter's birthday, because it's on September 13th. So like right in the middle of prime time. And, they got in some elk, but it was just, completely different it was so hot and everything. So this year, I think we're going to try to go mid-September. Dave might actually fly out and meet us after, like we're going to drive up and then he might fly out and meet us somewhere. But yeah, so probably those mid 2 weeks of September.
I think that's probably my favorite time to go, is maybe like the 15th to the 30th are dates historically that I've really enjoyed over the years. I just, it's cool because I think the more people that we talk to and we meet that have ventured out west and actually tried it for the first time, the feedback overwhelmingly is, man, why didn't I do that earlier? Number one.
Oh God. Yeah.
And then number two, this is happening every year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's just crazy how it just takes that opportunity to get there, before you realize that what you're maybe missing out on. And it's so cool to hear these kind of stories. What kind of advice would you give guys listening right now that are considering this? Maybe they've done a little bit of research, or they've considered the idea of going west, but they just haven't quite got there. Like, what are a couple of things that might help them get over that hump and actually try it out in the next year or two?
Yeah. So to preface this, we talked about this before we started recording. Like, you have guys that have the desire, like you guys did, and then you have a wealth of information, either being an app, online, like forums. You have all this information out there. What is that? What step do you need to take to actually make it happen? Like what finally happened where you guys was like, we're doing this? Because I think a lot of guys get stuck at that point. It's kind of like us with Alaska. We talked about Alaska a lot. None of us have ever stepped foot in Alaska. I think Alaska is kind of like, for Western guys, like that's kind of like the ultimate, like they want to go experience that Alaska thing, just like, how Midwest and Eastern guys want to come do the Western thing. And we have all this information, but we just haven't taken that step. What finally happened for you guys to like take that step, and some advice for other people that are thinking about it and have the desire to do it?
Honestly, you just got to do it, and not to be rude, but I feel like there's so many people that just want, like an easy path of like, oh, here's a unit you should go. This is what you got to do. But that's not how it is. You're going to have to do tons of research. I mean, like hours and hours online. There's going to be an investment up front if you don't have gear. I mean, it is what it is. The good thing is once you get the gear, you've got the gear. And I'm not saying you have to have, I've heard you guys say so many times, save money and buy tags. Like initially it doesn't have to be the best gear in the world, but you got to have a tent, you got to have a stove, you got to have a sleeping pad. But once you have the stuff, your investment's over. And I mean, you can use it, as long as it'll last. So you're going to have to buy some gear and just commit. Like just freaking, once we decided we were going, there was like no turning back. Okay, we're going to freaking go. Even if we don't, and we were realistic about it. Like we're not going to kill an elk probably. We're going out there with the mindset we want to kill an elk. We're going to, but probability is we're not going to. So let's just have an adventure, go out there and freaking, even if we didn't kill an elk, the experience we had of, being with, three of my best friends, camping and, going somewhere we didn't know, like that was, a success in itself. So just like making the commitment, knowing it's not going to be easy up front as far as, getting information, but just research. All the resources are out there. Watching you guys go back and look at all your freaking videos you have of, whether it's OnX or, scouting or, calling, different scenarios, like the resources are out there. It's just taking the time to sit down and freaking do it. And to be Mac's point, like dividing the responsibility up and, just getting after it and make that commitment and go, because once you experience it, you'll freaking be like, why in the heck hadn't I been doing this, 10 years ago?
What changed from year one to year two and or about to be year three? Like what things are you guys going to do maybe a little bit different that you learned while out in the field? Or I know you kind of mentioned a couple like gear components that you had, but maybe you would have done something different there. Walk us through maybe a couple of those learning lessons from like in-field experience to what you're going to change on this next one that you're going out this fall.
definitely we took a lot of stuff we didn't need, which that's expected, you know. A lot of things in the packs that we didn't need is, you know, probably really took too much food. I mean, you definitely want to have enough food, but at least the first year we went, we took way too much food, or I did. As far as just the hunting aspect, I mean, we're gonna go back to a spot where, I mean, we've encountered elk every year, so it's like, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we're still, you know, going to approach it the same way. As far as if we hike back in there and there's no elk, then we're going to come out. I think this year we might actually break up, kind of like more your guys' style with the land of the free type stuff, is maybe do 2 and 2, go up different drainages for a day or two and have more communication and try to get on the elk. And then if they're not there, like meet back at the trailhead and go somewhere else. Also, like even more calling. I think that at that time of the year is just, you know, it's huge.
Yeah, the old cat road shuffle definitely is effective for sure.
Yeah.
So those are some do's. Do you have any don'ts for new guys that are wanting to do it? Is there any advice that you would not recommend doing?
I will say, if you do kill, because we had that Suburban, we were so scared of putting that elk head, like, I like skull it out and clean the skull as best I could, but we didn't put it on top of the luggage rack because we were scared. We're like, what about if we get in a wreck and it just smashes the skull? But so we had this thing in a trash bag in the back of the Suburban. By the time we hit North Carolina, man, it was rank.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
the old Dirty Dave get the deposit back on that thing or what?
Yeah, he did. But I think he gave it a good cleaning. But yeah, so if you kill, like, you know, we had the meat obviously well taken care of in coolers, but you might want to put the skull on top of the vehicle and strap it down.
Oh man, we got some funny stories about that for some antelope hunts, but man, I think we've said it before, but love having you share your story with everybody today. I think it's super inspiring, and I hope it motivates some of you guys listening to take that next step, you know, and make it happen. We have a saying that you only get so many opening days, and I think it's a very, very true statement, especially in these crazy times, man. It's going to make September so much more enjoyable this time around, more so than it ever has before. So Timber Ninja Outdoors, let's give those guys a little bit of a plug. What are you doing? What's unique about this particular company that you're now a part of?
Yeah, so me and a few of my buddies are starting a mobile hunting company. We're developing carbon fiber products for like mobile hunters and the whitetail, mainly focused towards whitetail. We have some carbon fiber climbing sticks that we're about to come out with. We're just waiting on the website to get done. It should be done here in a few weeks. But yeah, it was basically just started from one of my other buddies, Jason Red. He's kind of the founder of the company. We do a lot of, you know, like backpack style hunting in the mountains, North Carolina, and was trying to figure out how to save weight. And he had a good resource for some carbon fiber and started working on some sticks. And me and Tricky and him have kind of developed these sticks, and you know, the feedback's been good so far. So we're excited to get it launched, and just is what it is. Where it kind of turned in from one of those things of like Jason making the sticks, and then when I got my hands on them, I'm like, dude, we've got it. Like, I want a set of these. And he's like, really? I'm like, yes. So it kind of developed into one of those things like maybe we should, you know, look at trying to sell some of this stuff. So
turning a little hobby into a business sounds familiar for sure. Where can we find you on like Instagram or something?
Timber Ninja Outdoors on Instagram, Facebook, and then we have a YouTube channel, Timber Ninja Outdoors. And like I said, the website's going to be finished here in a few weeks, but
it's crazy.
We should be releasing those sticks. So
we're super novice, obviously, on the whitetail side, but it's pretty wild to see how that kind of mobile saddle style, go super light, you know, really nimble type of hunting has picked up the last couple of years.
Oh yeah, big time.
All right, man. Well, we appreciate you sharing your story with us. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel or give us a follow on Instagram over at Get Hushin. We've got some more shed hunting videos to come. We got some the turkey quest has begun. Casey and his boy Gage and Logan just got off of a pretty rad hunt.
Yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the turkey quest. By this point, you guys should have watched the 4 videos. I just wanted to end this real quick. It's very inspiring for me to hear Jordan's story and his buddies, but I think the best advice I can give anybody that's thinking about doing it is you're never going to be 100% prepared to come out west. There's just no way around that. You're never going to be in the shape that you need to be. You're never going to have all the right equipment. You're never going to make all the right decisions, but you just have to do it, because like where Jordan's sitting at now, they started doing this 2 years. Now that you guys have done this for 2 years, you're light years ahead of where you're at. So the sooner you start, the sooner you come out and do it, the further ahead you're going to be. That's kind of my last take on this whole thing, Jordan. It's very cool having you on. And it even inspired me, your guys' story. Just making it happen is really cool. I think that's what a lot of people need to hear, is just make it happen. Just do it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys having me on. And, me and all my buddies really appreciate just the content you guys put out, because realistically, if it hadn't been for you guys and putting stuff out, and showing everybody that this is something that can be done, then, we might not have had the courage to just like buckle down and do it. So we really appreciate everything as well.
Thanks, man. We appreciate that.
Appreciate that, brother. All right, guys. Hope you guys have a fantastic day, and we'll see you on the next podcast.